Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, a client call is usually a request for help. The problem lies with the client's timing on when they ask for help. All too often, it's more like a cry for help. They do not ask for help early enough.
Yeah, Michael, the timing is huge. It makes a big difference for us as to what is the size of the problem and whether or not how we can help eventually, hopefully, overcome whatever that problem is. And, last season we had an entire season dedicated to dumpster fires where a client always seemed to call us either in the middle of a dumpster fire or way late inside of it. And it left us with either a bunch of bad choices on how to either get them out of the fire if possible or just try to contain it. And, we've talked about this in multiple other podcasts, but this is when we always kind of reference the 550 rule, which is, look, you can hire someone up front and pay them $5 to do it right for you, or in the back end, you're going to pay them $50 to fix it. Conceptually being is that it's best to bring someone in early to help you with that.
Yeah, and today we'll explore when someone should ask for help when considering buying or selling a business. Before we introduce today's guest, Brad, do you want to hear 3 crazy but profitable acquisition stories?
Thank you for asking me the question. I know I don't have a choice, so sure, let's go for it.
Okay. Caveat, these stories are from the internet and may or not be completely accurate.
No, everything's right. No, I'm sure it's fine.
It's from the internet.
Okay.
It's a good citation source. The first acquisition goes all the way back to when you were a baby, Brad. In 1935,
yes, exactly.
Mars, the candy company, apparently acquired a company called Chappell Brothers. Chappell Brothers made Chappie canned dog food. Fast forward to today, more of Mars' business comes from pet brands like Pedigree and Whiskas than from candy.
Let's hope that these production lines are not in the same place.
Yeah, and I'm really proud of you for resisting, low-hanging dad joke fruit there. In 1965, General Mills acquired Rainbow Crafts, which was the maker of Play-Doh. The food company soon added to the toy expansion by acquiring Kenner Toys.
Oh, Kenner Toys. I know all about that company. That basically is the toy maker of my childhood. Tell the audience how that worked out.
Well, this new toy line ended up betting on some film in 1977 called Star Wars and licensing Star Wars toys.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up Star Wars. We definitely don't talk about Star Wars enough on our podcast, and we probably should at least get it in every single episode.
Yeah, and probably true confession there for Brad is that you want to have a dedicated room full of Star Wars toys here at the office, and I think you've been petitioning for a bring your lightsaber to work day.
I mean, these are all great ideas, and so I'm glad that you're able to help us with this. But I know we have one more acquisition story that we're going to tell our audience about.
In 1979, Getty Oil invested $10 million for an 85% stake in a satellite sports channel called ESP Network. This worked out well just 5 years later when ABC acquired ESPN for $200 million.
Yes, because what we know is in life, all these stories are really easy to pay very little to get lots out of it. Surely there's a little bit more to it. And because of that, let's bring in today's guest to help us learn more about mergers and acquisition. Michael, who is our guest today?
Today joining us is Ben Hernandez. He is a founder and partner of Skytale Group. Skytale is a financial consulting firm with services that include financial advising, M&A strategy, and business operations advice. And we get along well with Skytale because their tagline is deciphering complexity into clarity, which really sounds familiar and similar to our tagline of creating simplicity. Earlier in Ben's career, he worked with an international banking group, with a hedge fund, and financial services and advisory institutions. Ben and co-founder Jessica Nunn also worked together at a CPA and advisory firm. Ben's undergrad is at Texas A&M. Yes, I said it again. We keep having Aggies on here for some reason. BBA in finance, MBA at SMU Cox School of Business. Ben's married and has a daughter, and they enjoy escaping to Colorado to enjoy the outdoors, at least according to his own bio on the Skytale website. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be with you guys today.
This will be fun. And, Mike, as Michael mentioned, we have known you for literally over half a dozen years, and I've loved to see how you work with our clients and help them. Can you share with the audience some of your background?
Yes, absolutely. Looking forward to the next 6 years, by the way, with you guys. But I think you covered my background pretty well. But I think if I had to summarize it, it tends to be finance heavy. Worked in investment banking, as you mentioned, got my MBA. At the time, thought I'd go to New York to either be at another investment banking group or private equity or a hedge fund. And it was there at SMU where I found HBK, which was a relatively large hedge fund here out of Dallas, and thought, well, if I can do this from Dallas, then that's fantastic. And really happy I did. While I was there at HBK, one of my friends, his wife actually worked at a CPA and advisory firm, and they were really trying to build out the advisory wing. And I always wanted to be a business owner, an entrepreneur. And I still remember Professor Littman. He's one of the co-founders at hotels.com at SMU. And he would tell us the class was conservative entrepreneurship. And he would say, go ahead and found your business now, because the chips get taller and the risk gets more difficult over time to found your business. So I thought, it's a bit of a career shift, but if I can't start my own business, I'd love to help my heroes, if you will, which are small business owners. And that's where they tended to focus. So made a career shift over there. So that was a bit of my background pre-Skytale.
Awesome. And talk a little bit about, just what, for those that aren't familiar with kind of your world and how you help, especially kind of pre-Skytale, kind of what those deals would look like and where your experience and expertise would fit in.
Certainly. So, pre-Skytale, spent most of my business life analyzing companies or preparing them to sell, one of the two. So in investment banking, we would do everything from raising capital for small to medium-sized businesses to all the way up to taking them fully to public by way of an IPO. So I fell in love with trying to help business owners really achieve their dreams there. And then at HBK, it was on the opposite side of the table. We would actually be analyzing businesses, and it's a multi-strategy fund. So sure, you had some things that were listed on the S&P and the like, but there are also emerging markets, private placements that we're dealing with. So there we were analyzing from the other side of the table, what really is a beautiful business? What businesses are we interested in investing in? And some of the concepts behind that, and how a business really achieves high value. So when we went to the CPA and advisory firm, I was trying to find my way, and they were very healthcare heavy. And it was there that there was this thing called MSO and DSO, and the healthcare industry really starting to consolidate. It's a very fragmented industry, depending on the type of subsector you're talking about. And you saw this beautiful thing of consolidation. And I very naturally fit in there in trying to help our clients. A lot of our consultants there at the time were helping single solo locations who hang their shingle. And we did a very good job, I think, of analyzing them from a external CFO perspective. But then there was this other set of clientele that were wanting to be these entrepreneurs and going from being, for example, doctors to executives. And how exactly do you do that? How exactly do you transition from working in your practice to on your practice, or rather organization? How do you build out your team? How do you scale? What are the concepts of it? And how do you ensure that location 1, for example, looks as beautiful as location 10, and you have that consistency, and you have to do that by building out a very strong team, by setting very strong expectations, and coming back to it. So really just fell in love with that space there.
Did you, when you were there and you would build them out, did y'all help exit them as well when they would have transactions?
We did not. We were starting to head toward that, and we had a conversation around that. And we definitely saw white space there, where with our client base, we saw a lot of brokers that were very good at selling, for example, doctor-owned practice to another doctor who was interested in acquiring a practice. We saw an opportunity, however, with our clients that were growing to, let's just say 10 to 15 locations, had a significant management team, had significant revenues and significant profitability, or EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, which is a big way that, they were being valued. So we definitely saw white space there. As far as for those, it wasn't another doctor owner buying it. It was actually a private equity group or an MSO or DSO backed by private equity buying them. And that's an entirely different process, valuation method, and negotiation method.
So now talk to us about what has to be the most exciting part. You did decide to become an entrepreneur and you co-founded Skytale Group.
We did. As mentioned, my partner and I, Jessica Nunn, we were both at that CPA and advisory firm. We both really loved the services industry. We loved the healthcare industry and various subsectors within it. And you just touched on one of the opportunities, the M&A side. As we really got together, we wanted to found a firm that was consulting first and foremost instead of an ancillary. And what we really mean by that is we found great value in providing a true CFO to our clients that maybe we're not at a revenue level to where they can truly pay for one or should pay for one in-house. We wanted to provide that same level of service to our clientele. And specifically what we're talking about is the history is important, which is what a CPA is very good at. It's putting your taxes together, putting your accounting together, which is everything historical up to today. We really wanted our core to be everything from today to 3+ years from now, and driving it that way, and that being the core of the business. Within that, we really wanted to then realize who is exactly our client and why. And our client, we touched on it a little bit, is healthcare, for example, a subsector within healthcare that is fragmented and consolidating, or has the ability to consolidate, because we think there it takes advantage of all of our services. We can take let's just take an example client that is starting his or her own practice, and we can stay with that client in perpetuity with a single location and act as their external CFO, bring that financial clarity to them, make sure that their profitability is where it should be, that any strategic discussions or decisions we can have. We then also wanted to be able to service that client who maybe thinks one day, you know what, I actually want to scale to 15 locations. How do I do that? We can move that client over to our management consulting side, where we're talking about putting a team together, a management team together, to start servicing each of their future locations and what exactly that looks like, and walk with them every step of the way. And then finally, if and when they get to that 15th location, if they do have some sort of exit strategy, sell strategy in mind, we can actually fully take them to market. And we really wanted that whole circle to be closed, because one side leverages the other. If ever in our consulting clients, they want to know, hey, what does the market look like? We have real life experience in exactly what it looks like. What are the multiples? What do the buyers like to see or not see? We're really able to drive them by real life experience. Conversely, on the M&A side, we are driving these clients to scale and to prepare them for sale. So when we're putting a book together, we actually already know all of the metrics. We already know how they're going to be forecasted, why that forecast is a good forecast. And we think that it adds a level of validity to buyers because we are in this space and we are actually doing exactly what they're trying to do as well on a smaller scale.
That's awesome. So, Ben, when Michael and I started this podcast, we were talking about last season all being about dumpster fires. And this season, one of the things we learned with the dumpster fires, often they weren't picking up the phone and asking for help. And so for this season, for the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto is, when should I ask for help? And so with that background that you have, can you share a story where a client just failed to ask for help?
Yes, absolutely. The thing that immediately comes to mind, unsolicited offers. And I think maybe a lot of the listeners are going to be able to relate to this. First, I should back up. An unsolicited offer, the way we're describing it is you're working in your business. You don't have any plans to sell today, maybe down in the future, but not today. And you get a knock on your door or a phone call, and it's a potential buyer, and they're asking you questions about your business, and they're asking you to send over some financial data. And then all of a sudden, fast forward a few weeks from there, you have this letter of intent, LOI. It's an offer sheet in your hands, and there's a dollar amount on there. And depending on when that buyer catches you, we've had instances to where our client, in their mind, they see that dollar amount and maybe they've spent the money in their mind already, or they've saved their money in their mind. Or from a psychological or emotional perspective, it's difficult at times being an owner and personally guaranteeing your practice, being responsible for payroll, being responsible for your team. And maybe they catch you at the right time where it sounds pretty nice to do away with that responsibility and stress. And we get the phone call, and typically that phone call is, hey, I have this offer letter. And we ask, how'd you get it? And they tell us something along the lines of the story that I just mentioned. By that time, it's pretty late in the game for us to do too much. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is you've already made your first impression from a seller to a buyer. You've sent the data without, window dressing it or preparing it for what a buyer really wants to see. You've told your story and you already have that letter of intent in your hand. We can help in some ways. We can help probably from a deal structure perspective. Maybe we can discuss with the buyer that the non-compete radius or number of years is too long, or how long our seller has to work with you is too long. But it's really difficult to affect much change on a purchase price, for example, which is where for the most part the sellers tend to concentrate, at least early on, because the buyer knows that they're the only game in town for you. Mm-hmm. They reached out to you. You didn't run a process. They're paying for your business then what they want to pay for your business. And oftentimes we find it's a decent deal, but we 100% of the time, I would say, find that we could get a better deal if we had gone fully to market and had more eyeballs on it. I always like to compare it to, let's pretend we didn't have Zillow and I knocked on your house and I asked you to buy your house. If I were the only one and you didn't have any data points as to what your house is truly worth, it's difficult making that decision and telling me yes. Why not put a sign out front and let buyers come to you and really determine what the true market value is for your house? It would be just that way. And you're selling your life's work. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
And we hear stories like this all the time. Of course, for us, usually it's on the legal side. You heard Brad talk about the 550 rule. When's the ideal time for a business to ask for help? And is it even if they're not necessarily looking to sell their business, is there something they can be proactively doing in case, that event arises?
Yes, I think from a top-down level, and I'll get more specific here, I don't think it's ever too early to ask for help if you're ever thinking of selling your business. And I'll get more specific. What I mean by that is we have clients that tell us that they want to sell in 5 years, but there's a game plan in place. and we start working toward that. So if you have big goals as to where you want to be in 5 to 10 years, it's never too early to ask for help, because you need to know how you're going to get from here to there. You probably have some sort of painting in your mind that you've painted. You need to express that and paint it for people that can help you so you can fully realize that. So we do have clients that do that. I would say a sweet spot, if you're thinking of selling, is at least 18 to 24 months. And the reason I say that is typically if you're going to sell your business, a buyer is going to look at your trailing 12 financials, among other things, but they're going to heavily weigh your trailing 12 financial performance. And they're going to look at your EBITDA, what we talked about earlier, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Roughly a way to think about EBITDA, it's free cash flow. It's free cash flow that the buyer is buying, and they're going to weigh you on that. So that 18 to 24 months gives us about 6 to 12 months to maybe tighten a few things, tweak a few things, and maybe change the books a little bit to where it's really deal ready, as we like to call it. We like to talk to our clients, and one of the things we emphasize is always be ready to be deal ready, meaning the way you run your business ought to be, you can turn it on tomorrow if you want to, and the buyer is going to like what they see, at least from the way that you're running your business. So that allows us 6 to 12 months. And then if that's too late in the game, I would say anything from 12 months in, as long as you haven't yet started contacting buyers or signed LOIs, would be a good time to ask for help as well, because there are things at each of those stages that professionals can do to help, whether it's wealth advisors or legal firms or firms like ours on the consulting side.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I think it's fascinating. We often see the case, as you said, that someone just doesn't realize the ramp up time they need to really prepare themselves. I always call it the underwear drawer. Hey, if you're bringing someone in to acquire you, you're going to have to show them everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so I love the fact that you're saying, hey, get us in early enough so we can start fine tuning it, cleaning it up, and prepare you so you look better on books, and most importantly, fine tune, especially on the financial side, the things that we need to tweak.
Yeah, and just an example from that, contrast it here, if you will, to the unsolicited offer, taking an example of a client that recently sold for us, with us. We had a conversation about a year and a half ago. He called us, he was already our client, and he just asked, hey, what do you think I could go for if I were to go to market today? So we knew this client pretty well. 10 minutes later, we were giving him a number, and we said, this is what we think you could go for, middle of the fairway. He said, okay, that number sounds interesting to me. Here's why I'm asking. I've had a couple of potential buyers reach out. They've started conversation. I know that you've said that's a no-no, so I'm bringing it to you, and I want to know, in your opinion, what we might go for. And that number seems interesting to me. Let's talk further. So what we did then is we put together a true theoretical letter of intent and what that really looks like. Because let's just academic example, take a business that's valued at $10 million. We want to be sure that anyone out there realizes that it's not $10 million that's going into your bank account the day of close. Typically what deal structures look like is, what we did with him is, let's just say it was $10 million. We said, well, as a buyer, I know that this business does not work without you. Your patients depend on you, what have you. So I'm going to ask you to roll 25% into my firm. In other words, 2.5 million of that 10, I want you to reinvest into the buyer firm so you can have some skin in the game and be motivated, and ideally not nosedive the business. That's a buyer's perspective. Hopefully that 2.5 million of equity turns into something really nice for our seller. That's a longer conversation. But then the next thing beyond that is they're likely going to ask you to buy it net of debt and cash. So let's just say that we had $2 million net of debt and cash on the debt side, which is pretty realistic for a $10 million type of offer. So now you're down to $5.5 million, but we haven't talked about taxes. We haven't talked about a few other things in there, deal structure as well. So we want to be sure this is likely the money that you'll be wired the day that we close. Is this okay? In this case, he green lighted it and said, yeah, that's pretty much in range with our goals. Let's keep talking. So at that point, we go to the next stage, which is really getting ready to fully go to market. And what we mean by that, it's about a 9-month process. We take a few weeks of putting together a SIM, confidential information memorandum. Basically what it is a 50 or 60 page book, depending on the size of the business, that will give a potential buyer all the information they need to know about your business. So they're giving them your bio, giving them historical financial performance, future financial performance, leadership team discussion, what each of your practices looks like. Any information ideally that you want a buyer to know about your business is on there. So we put that together for them. We put together then a virtual data room is what it's called. It's a bunch of basically anything contractual that you've ever done in your business, anything financial, lease terms, anything that a buyer would need to do to analyze your business. And then finally put together a buyer list. So in the unsolicited offer, just to contrast it, the buyer is picking you. In this case, we would recommend to anyone thinking of selling, you pick the buyer. You give a profile of this is who I would like to sell to from a profile perspective and come up with a buyer list. In this case, it was 50 to 75 potential buyers. Now that sounds like a big number, but there's a reason for that. When we got all of this material together, he said, okay, green light it, let's go to market. We communicate all this information all at once to the 50 to 75 potential buyers by emails and follow up with phone calls until we get a yay or nay as far as interest is concerned. So if you think about that 50 to 75, sounds like a lot of people or entities at the top of the funnel. Some are not going to be interested and they'll back out. Maybe geographically, that's not really where they're focused right now. Maybe the services you're offering is no longer where they're focused. We'll also along the way, weed some out ourselves. Maybe the offers that are initially coming in aren't strong enough and won't quite get there. The idea here is, though, that what we wanted and what we got was a good handful of solid letter of intents to compare and contrast in front of us. I think it was about 4 or 5 really strong ones. And then from there, we're able to call some of the buyers and we're able to say, we like some things in your LOIs, but there's some things that may need tweaking and you're not quite the strongest. Would you like to sharpen your pencil, or is this the best offer? So again, think of it from the unsolicited side where we don't have some of these mechanisms to play with. Here, what we're doing is we're ideally pushing up value because every buyer knows that there's someone else that they're competing with. And we were able to get some solid LOIs and pick one that he really liked. And I think another thing that's important to mention, and this is pretty typical of our client base, is he didn't pick the highest offer. And the reason for that is there are so many things that you as a seller need to know. You need to think about the fact that you're probably going to be working with the buyer for a number of years. Are they the right partner? We mentioned that you might be rolling equity with that buyer. Is that the right buyer to trust 25% of your business that you've spent building with? So we go through discussions around who's backing it. Are they in your space? In this case, healthcare. Have they been in the healthcare space? How did they do? How have other sellers been with the buyer? Are they happy? There are a myriad of things that I think that you can do homework on because it's not okay for only the buyer to do due diligence on you. You as a seller should also be doing diligence on the buyer because you're still going to continue working with them. So at the end of the day, we felt like we picked a very, very good LOI. To us, that was the right way to do it. And he was compensated for it.
That's awesome. I mean, those in the audience, hopefully you're as excited as I am because I love hearing these great stories and all, but knowing the nuances that have to go into these deal points. So Ben, we are so grateful that you could join us today on the Legal 1-2-3s with ByrdAdatto. We're going to say goodbye now and go to commercial. And on the other side, Michael and I will share a little bit of legal insights that we have from today's episode. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael and Brad. Always love spending time with you guys and hope your listeners got something out of this.
Awesome.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to the Legal 1-2-3s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto. I'm still here with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Michael, this season the theme is when should I ask for help? Ben brought up some great points on trying to make these plans work and all the process you go through with a letter of intent. But based on some of his thoughts, what are some of the takeaways you can share with our audience today?
Well, I'll start. I've been doing this for over 25 years, and that's one of the best explanations I've heard from someone in Ben's world. It was fascinating.
Yes.
And the first thing that comes to my mind is go back to the beginning, and we're talking about these 3 crazy deals. One when you were a baby in 1935, and then your Star Wars acquisition, and so if you think about those stories, they sound glamorous because we're looking at them backwards.
Yep.
With the rearview mirror. We know that they had some planning that went into those at the beginning for them to be successful, and Ben just illustrates. There's some real work that you put into if you're planning to sell or buy a practice that or business that how you can benefit from that. And the first time we see deals a lot of time is in that letter of intent phase that he so talked about. And he had so many great points that even we hadn't experienced about the dangers of getting that, just letter of intent out of the blue and how you're already maybe stuck on the purchase price. Well, we have clients who think, oh, this is a non-binding letter of intent. I'm going to sign it. Sometimes they don't even call us and ask for help at that stage. And there's just some other pitfalls to think about from our worldview, one of which is that there often are binding provisions in those letters of intent. And you may have a no-shop clause in there that says once you sign this, you're not going to talk to anyone else. And we've had a client who really was hurt by being handcuffed by that because there was someone else knocking that really wanted to pursue a deal with them once they got things together. And then finally, it does matter what you sign off on. You're setting expectations. And so, from our point of view, it is worth doing the heavy lifting at the letter of intent phase to make sure everyone's on the same page. And that's in addition to the work that Ben recommends doing prior to the letter of intent.
Yeah, I completely agree. Having those hard conversations at the letter intent phase is so important because if you're not thinking through all the things, as Ben said, that you either know about or you might be missing that's not inside that letter intent. Have you talked about really understanding those restrictive covenants, or have you really talked about whether or not you're going to escrow funds or roll it into something else? So they hear, oh, I'm going to get $10 million, but they don't realize actually at closing you're getting $5 million. And so those are all the things that if you're not having those conversations up front and having a good representation in the very beginning, you're going to frame this beautiful house that you think you're getting. And in reality, it's not as beautiful as you think. And now you've been running with this wrong pack. And as Ben said, don't use these unsolicited. Look at these other ones where you can go out and you can be saying, these are the 3 or 4 different people I like, and I'm going to take a piece from this person and a piece from this person, and I'm going to develop, in my case, the best buyer for me. And that doesn't always mean the highest price because I'm looking for someone that I think is going to help carry me forward to the next stage. So I loved the closing parts were so important, what Ben gave on that piece.
Completely agree.
Excellent. Join us next Wednesday when we discuss tear-soaked pizza. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.